Oh, let's all of us just take a few deep breaths and be present right where you are. All the workings of your heart and your liver and your stomach and your tissue and your blood cells, your brain, your hair, your skin, your body. It's a magnificent terrain. It's as vast and diverse as the planet Earth. And it is infinite in its finite nature. This body that we're feeling as we breathe in and breathe out, this is the manifestation of compassion working through our unique compilation of consciousness. And as we go into this channel, I'd like to ask us to all be present in our bodies, because that's where the communication is going to come as you listen to our words. You will hear our words through your hearing, also through the wordless communication of your heart, the wordless communication of emotion, through every fractal cell that's making up your physical body. You are the perfect combination of the synergy of your consciousness, which is compassion plus energy, and the manifestation of that consciousness, which is your physical body. And what you are doing is you are intentionally stepping up to your life, to your body, to everything that you're projecting and perceiving, to everything that you are receiving from within your own compilation, tied directly to the source of compassion, infused with the intention to create for the good of the whole, beginning with the host. So we will command that only the most divine light shine down upon you at this time, and that the greatest good be present here. This condition that we've just described, that you clearly are aware of as you're listening, is the perspective of the new energy. And you are in this new energy. This new energy is the compassion that's inspiring, impelling energy to create consciousness that's committed to work for the good of the whole system, beginning with the host. That's the new energy. The new operating system is the revolutionary way in which you look at the psyche in relationship to physical manifestation. These perspective changes are ones that you have made through many decades in this body, in this life. And when you came here to be Heike or Debbie or Barbara or Lily or Teresa, or Tamara or Sherry or any other human, Ron or David, who has listened to this truth, felt the truth reverberate within them to inspire them to put this truth even farther through their body by way of getting out of just the belief and becoming the waking, walking manifestation of compassion, using energy to incite consciousness to intentionally operate for the good of the whole, starting with the host. And what intelligence this programs into then the next phase, which is the gravitational wave flowing from the center of the planet to your body, creating space-time. This part of the operating system is conflict resolution. If the mechanism is aligned to compassion, emotion will flow and intuition will impel the next most advantageous step for the good of the whole operating system, starting with the host. This is the programming that is being put into the artificial intelligence now as well. And when you have the programming to start with the host, you create the foundation, much like your soil, your organic soil. You create the foundation for what is going to grow out of that soil. And what seeds you've planted in it is that it's going to be for the good and the thriving of all, in a joyous manifestation of what real peace means. And as you commit yourself to this on these little everyday ways, you're not even aware how many times you're fortifying the new operating system, where you're becoming compassion. Because some of these decisions are so tiny that the moment you decide to step away from somebody who intuition has been saying no, and you've been saying yes, the moment you say no, the entire field shifts. That's how much power you have. But when the system is working against itself, where intuition is saying no and intellect is saying yes, and weaving all kinds of stories and gateway propaganda into the rest of the system for why you have to say yes when intuition is clearly telling you no. Quantum leap between intuition and intellect, but that's where it is. And you know it. You see it when you operate it. Also, those who are trying to master the system, you repeatedly have to psych out your intellect, much like we had to in the beginning. We couldn't just tell you where you were going and everything that was going to happen. You wouldn't have been able to digest any of that. That's why Jesus went into the time that he did to find a way to articulate the most complex into the simplest of stories that humanity could be seated with, so that when they got to the point where they were so wide awake that they realized they had the power and they could make the choice to save humanity, to work for the good of all. And that's where you are. And those of you who are in the forefront, at the head of the comet, satellite blasting through the unknown, proving the point by demonstration, you've taken decades to prepare. So the rest of the world at this time could not have to go that long. And even to you, you forget the layers upon layers of the onion as you peel out 10 years ago 12 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago? At what stage of development were you 25 years ago? Now that you are where you are now. You couldn't really see it 25 years ago, but you could. It was just a faraway planet that you had to get to. And now that you are this age, in these times, doing these things, you know so much more than you did 25 years ago and that 25-year-old. And thusly, we want to remind you that the earth is in this stage as well. And that despite anything that anyone is defining about what is happening on the planet right now, there's always other ways to look at it. You all who are listening to this understand that. You don't watch the news, and that you are the one who are controlling the mind, and knowing the only mind you need to control is your own is the most powerful thing that you can take in. Because when you know that your domain is your responsibility, whatever goes on within your intellectual perception, it's yours. And that's why people do dissociate. That's why people don't pay attention. Because the more you open, the more you become a part of infinity, the more you become a part of everyone, Hitler and Jesus and everything in between, the more you see and recognize that you just have your one domain. And then when you willingly step up and take mastery of that with the intention of working for the good of the whole, beginning with the host, to make sure there's enough food and water and sunlight and good earth to grow in, and love and community to be in, and a safety that comes from true mastery of self, knowing that absolutely no one else is in charge of you except you. And that every day you're more willing to step up to say, yes, that's who I want to be. That's who I am. This is where we're going, to where each individual takes 100% responsibility for their domain. First and foremost, to make sure the host is not carrying any viruses, to make sure the host is not doing projection of any kind except what thrives for all of us. What you're witnessing today is the byproduct of those of you on the planet who have been devoted to this in whatever form. We here at the Conflict Revolution Institute have been doing it one particular way for over 40 years, only to prove our point that the simplicity of how we can explain it to you activates everything else that sits on top of it. If you activate this system within you and you're a scientist, then those avenues of creativity are going to be what gets elevated, unless, of course, there's a major soul change where now you're going to be a musician. Whatever happens, it enhances the manifestation of your life as it is in this body, in this space-time, in this reincarnation. We want to talk about quote unquote past lives in a different way, a 180-degree revolution back to the beginning and the end. Because ultimately, in the circle of souls, out on the observer of the planet, out in the heavens like a halo, this eternal place that you have out there to look down on that beautiful planet, that living body of amazing diversity and expression, genesis, creation, never-ending creation. Life after life after life after life after life after life after life. And so this eternal part of you that is out here completely already understands how to have a human experience in a lens. So right now, in the lens of June 23rd, 2025, wherever you are in the world, in your body, that is the focus and the programming from the compilation, directed by compassion with energy. And your participation at that level is to step up and say, I fully intend to work for the good of the whole, starting with the host, starting with myself, taking care of myself, being a master of myself. And that intention rides the wave to where your bodies are today, right now. So out here, from the observer's point of view, we see the lens of Debbie in Georgia, the lens of Heike and Barbara in Norway. We also see the lens of the three of Barbara, Teresa, and Kim in Italy in the 1600s. We see a big life, the lens of the big life of Lizelle in Ireland in 900. We see all of the other lenses. Your manifestation, for example, through the lens of June 2025 in the bodies that you're in, these particular bodies have something that none of the other bodies have. Metaphorically, that you've lit up, and when you're aligned to the good of the whole, starting with the host, then that brings in energy and programming that might have been used if you were thinking you were going to go off to war, or you're going to try to get somebody, or you're going to do some projecting. Right at the base, the compilation, the source, to infuse the human intention that you have, because you have that body sitting there on the planet. They're connected to say, we're going to do everything for the good of the whole, starting with the self. If that means, ultimately, when you get to the lens, through your intuition, that the self doesn't go on to be a scientist, but instead becomes a musician, that in and of itself, like a key to a puzzle, changes the manifestation of the macrocosm that you're watching as well. When you're looking at the metaphor of, say, war, as opposed to the reality of it, the three of you are not in your bodies are not physically in a war zone. But when you look at the metaphor of what's going on, and you track it to a journey of the psyche, or parts of your psyche that you've been trying to master, as you've intentionally, working for the good of the host means you're aligned to compassion. That's what that means. So you are letting those emotions flow through with your breath. You are listening for that intuition. And intellect is so humbled by how many times it's been wrong, how many times it's distracted you from your true power. And granted, some of that is grounding. So no judgments here. But now is a time, as you open up to understand from this bigger new energy, new operating system, new commitment to master yourselves that you've taken, just how much power is sitting there in your hands. And that is humbling to the intellect. The intellect should be very humbled that it got to get away with so much for so long. but it's been given one more chance to basically shut up and listen and observe, take notes without judgment. It's shifted from being the unsafe worrier to thriving under its new understanding of its role, which is so just as important as it always was. The ego, who was so afraid of being out of control, holding on to control. Well, the truth is you have the control. So quit being afraid of it and step up to use it in a way that is working for the good of the whole. Because when emotion thrives, then intuition thrives. And when intuition thrives, intellect can shut up, listen, and then be the warrior that takes action, doing what intuition, the divine feminine, is driving that force, the first fundamental force field of compassion, to manifest in ways that are miraculous and unexplainable. And that's why we prepare you to commit to the mystery, because the mystery is what you bow down to, the unexplainable. And the more you let go of what you think has to be explained and align yourselves in this way, you have become this force, the first fundamental force of the universe. So here you are and you're observer. And you see the lens of Norway and Georgia today, 2025, and you see the Lizal lens. And you see the other lenses of all different lives. And here's the trick, is that there are human archetypes, like a mold. You're putting together a life together. Well, let's have a life where all three of us are warriors together, so that we can learn what it means to be under fire and still working together, tied together by commitment, by passion, by shared vision and intention, and a powerful calling that's the same for all three of us. And so now what you see, the three of you, is you're looking down on a life in Romania. And it was at a time when the Crusades were being fought. And you were three holy fighters, holy war fighters, on the side of the church. And you had all the virtue on your side. You had Christ Jesus that you carried like a shrine, dying on the cross before you, thinking that you had the right and the will of God on your side. And that was true passion in your hearts, true calling in your hearts. And you did learn that in that life together. You were like triplets. You had instant, intuitive communication. And so you could look after each other intuitively, and you trusted each other as if you were each other. And you truly believed with every fiber of your being that you were fighting vaingloriously for the goodness of God. And while you were doing that, you were also wondering, in some part of your psyche, why am I killing? But one could not question that. Not only because you would never have been so vainglorious, but that was not the time. Of course, like a good soldier, you fought. You had God on your side. And this was embedded in the DNA of that operating system. So come back up to the observer and you see that life down there in the lens. And you see all of your compilations in the source. You're sharing the source together. Your compilations are superimposed over each other. And you see the operating systems that go out from there to that lens, in that time space, in those DNA bodies, and comes back to the observer. The revolutionary thing about this is that reincarnation is more like a carnival ride. And it's something that is instigated from outside of space-time. So it's not a linear, first you lived in this century, then you lived in the next century, then you lived in the next century. And the carnival ride that you're on in this lens in 2025 is that why we said your bodies are different. Because you are like a greater superhuman, wired into the consciousness of all those other carnival rides you've been on together. And it's showing up in your consciousness, your new energy, your new operating system, the understanding of what we're talking about, the ability for your bodies in 2025 to feel the bodies at the Crusades, to feel the bodies in Lizelle's time, to feel the bodies in another life where you lived, where you were completely enemies. And this was a time in Italy. And it was a much smaller scale because it was more tribal and many years ago. Probably 600. And it was just basically three tribes, three warring tribes. And the dynamic you learned in that was this dynamic of whoever is my enemy's enemy is my friend. And that set in motion a human dynamic in the human psyche, in the fear-based operating system, that led to distrust of self, but also in the three of you. And so at times you would ally with one or the other because at that time you had the same enemy, the other one. And in the end, you all ended up perishing in a big battle of all three tribes. And after you left that body, came back up here to the circle of souls, you bring with you into the awareness, your awareness here, the true nature of what that life was. And because you're in this superhuman body right now, you transmit that transmogrifying truth through the operating system, and partly because you can see that life now down there in Italy, and what transmogrifying truth is emanating out of your life in 2025 is bleeding over into that one. It doesn't necessarily mean that all war then disappeared, but there is a shift in that history. If you're talking about concurrent lives, formerly known as past lives, this is more of a perspective of what we see happening, is that there is a life, and it's this one in 2025, that you programmed that you were going to come in and you were going to be this instigator of transmogrification in an energy field that needed transmogrifying. The final programmed outcome is 100% success. Whatever carnival ride you want to take, you can decide that in your compilation, or you can talk about it here on the Circle of Souls in the Observer. You can communicate. What's best for the good of the whole, for my manifestation in 2025? In the whole operating system, not just this DNA space-time and the whole system, because you can only take in a tiny, tiny bit, no matter how many lives you choose to have a roller coaster experience about. The human mind of Heike, Debbie, Barbara, whoever else in 2025 is coming to this mastery. You only have so big a hard drive right now. It's much, much bigger than it was 25 years ago. But you're just taking it in. So you don't need to have repetitive ones. You can if you need to learn something. But from this point of view, there is no space-time. It looks like a lens sitting on the surface of the earth, and in there is all the space-time, but outside of it there isn't any. It's just it looks like a compilation of consciousness, the lens does, sitting on top of the planet from this point of view. And so there's instantaneous ability for observer to go, oh, we need Heike in June 24th, 2025 at 3:35 p.m. to receive information into her body as if she actually was living the life where she was learning how to do XYZ, that she can draw upon it at that time as a download to address the particular situation in which she is manifesting through her body in the lens there. This operation that we just described, where the new operating system from the observer can figure out what Heike in June 24, 2025 needs, and then draws upon any number of past lives to instantly send that information to that human mind in that particular moment. That's how vast and brilliant past lives are. And it takes you completely out of the slog that you go through when you're thinking about them in the lens. So you think about that life in the Crusades, which appeals to none of the three of you sitting here now in 2025. It's a traumatic life when we said it. You're in the Crusades. And it got more traumatic when you realized how virtuous you truly, truly, from every fiber of your being, thought you were being in that life. And you had to forgive yourselves. But you felt it instantly. And that's the kind of spontaneous communication that takes place because you're all actually in the compilation. The lens is just the byproduct. That's how quickly information can travel. So the idea is that this superhuman transmogrification that's happening in 2025 is all perfectly timed to bring these seeds, just like you've always been bringing seeds well ahead of the schedule. But by now, you're getting so used to being the sower of seeds and not the grower of seeds. It'll be nice when you come back and see the garden all full. But your job was to sow the seeds. Somebody else came along and made sure they were taken care of and watered. It's not to say that every seed you sow, you don't go on to grow, but so much of what you do is that. If you think about a plane that waters crops in the olden days, when they used to fly over with old biplanes with water and water the crops, chances are the pilot would rarely come back to weed the garden. Your job now is pulling all of this together in your body. And we feel like we've given you this whole
wider, broader perspective of how things work, that it's triggering even beyond thinking processes, how revolutionary this is and how it's going to minimize the suffering, as you call it, in your life. And suffering for us is just that there's some part of the psyche, some aspect or two, that still just wants to define things and hold on. That's suffering. Because when you're actually feeling the intense pain of, say, an anger or a sadness or all of that, it so changes dramatically when you're embracing it with a bigger force of compassion and surrounding it in compassion and letting it safely flow through and be completely heard and loved and released and transmogrified into intention, which then has an even louder voice. So intellect can take heed. And now you know that without you even having to think about it, whether you're in an airplane or you're at work or you're at the art gallery, that there's this giant system that's going on that you know is going to download exactly what you need, and that your job is to keep this body aligned to compassion, living the truth, and that intuition will always tell you when to speak, when not to speak. And so lasso in that intuition to be able to compel the intellect in a way. You see a cowboy throwing a rope around the neck of a wild horse in order to bring that horse into a beautiful alignment to its potential. And we're very excited because we think this explanation of concurrent lives is going to radically change how you see things on a day-to-day basis.